in your 40s and beyond, it's about how can I know the limits? How can I know the finite limits of my matter? And how can I prioritize recovery and reduce stress? So we want to be very careful about, always having our foot on the gas pedal, let's say, on the accelerator pedal. Sometimes the most productive thing that you can do is rest.
Stephanie, welcome. We met in London, I think, was it 3, 4 months ago now?
Couple months ago, yeah, we were co-hosting a couple of panels and talking about perimenopause, and we just hit it off. And you've invited me so graciously onto your show, and I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. Let's start off. I was reading your book, and you talk about a Betty and the Betty body, and I
Yeah.
just love everything about the Betty. Can you explain for listeners what that
Yes.
means?
Yes, this is an ode to my vintage heart. This is just my love of everything 40s, 1940s, 1950s. So my podcast, I'm a podcaster as you are. Our podcast is called Better by Dr. Stephanie with Dr. Stephanie. And our fans started calling themselves Betties. So, you listen to the Better podcast, you're a Betty. And I was like, oh, that's so good. It's this woman who and I sort of envision, sort of you think about like Betty White and Betty Davis and Betty Boop and like all these Bettys of years past who were very strong, very witty, very intelligent, and wanting to just actualize and live their best life. So it was a really sticky name and I loved it. And we called the first book, it was dedicated to our fans of the show because the podcast is something that I started. It was a passion project. I sat on it for several years before actually doing it. And once I started it, it is the absolute most favorite part of my work. And so the book is called The Betty Body, which is dedicated to all the Bettys. We have guy Bettys, we have girl Bettys, anyone who is really just trying to adhere to that philosophy of you don't have to be the best, but you just have to be better.
I love it. I love that. And the thing is, when you look it up, actually, Betty has its own definition, right? It
Yes.
is an actual word because I went to the trouble of then looking it up, and it
Yeah.
is about someone who wants to self-actualize. I just thought it was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love it. I love the name and it's just kind of stuck, It's one of those things where the community started calling themselves that and then we were like, "Oh, actually that's a really good branding. Really good marketing. Let's go with that." So sometimes like the best ideas you don't ever come up with yourself. It's the people, as a doctor, we always say like our patients are our greatest teachers and in this case, like my community is, my greatest marketing asset, right? Like they, name themselves. And I was like, oh, actually, I really love that. Let's go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It worked out well. What would you say then, from your perspective, is what does it mean to be a Betty?
I think for me, it's someone who is striving to do better in her life. So, or his life. But most of my audience is female. So we'll say, she has the capacity. She knows what she has to do. And maybe there's a couple of things that are holding her back. Maybe she has an injury, or maybe she doesn't know exactly the type of nutrition protocol that works for her, or there's some piece that's missing, even though she has the absolute capacity to do the thing. She needs a little bit of guidance, maybe some tools. And that's really what a Betty is someone who is always striving to do better in her life. Maybe she recognizes that she has some issues from her past that still need healing. She has a fitness gap that needs to be filled, a nutrition gap that needs to be filled, but she's ready and willing to learn and to figure it out, hopefully with my guidance and, of course, the community's guidance as well.
I love it. And looking at women, we were just talking a little bit offline about the challenges of perimenopause and being in your 40s. And I know you share a lot of content on social around that, and also very inspiring content around strength training and the work that you do. What are you seeing with your audience, with your Bettys, as the main challenges that women in their 40s are facing at the moment?
Oh gosh, there's quite a bit. I would say the sort of can I give you a top three? Maybe we can go
Yeah, give
through
me
the
top
top three.
three.
Yeah, I think the first is that women who are entering their 40s you've developed habits with food, habits with fitness, and all of a sudden it just doesn't seem to be working anymore. So the things that you were doing in your 20s or 30s no longer serving you. You find that your body composition might be changing a little bit in your 40s. Maybe you're putting on a little bit more fat that you don't necessarily want to be putting on, and it tends to be kind of centrally, like it tends to be through the midsection, rather than, let's say, the thighs or the bum kind of area. I would say so. Body composition changes is one. The other is sleep. That's probably, if I have like 1, 2, and 3, like body comp changes, sleep changes. Like, doc, I turned 42 and all of a sudden I can't sleep anymore. So waking up, I'm either having trouble initiating sleep, so getting to sleep, my mind is racing. I'm worried about my kids, my husband, my job, my house, my, you name it. And then there's also trouble maintaining the sleep. So there starts to be more waking up over the course of the evening, whether that's to go pee or you just wake up because you have sort of a shot of adrenaline, let's say, somewhere in the hours of like 2 and 4 in the morning. So the sleep is a really big issue. And of course, that leads to all that, makes everything worse. It makes your dietary choices worse. It makes your performance in the gym worse. It makes your ability to deal with stress worse. And so sleep is the second. And then rounding out the top 3 is kind of what we were talking about in the pre-chat kind of before we got going, which is our children, just this stress sandwich. You had a cool name. What did you call it? The stress?
Yeah, the sandwich generation, where you're kind of
Sandwich
caught
generation.
between aging
Yeah.
parents, and either some women, right, have got toddlers actually in their 40s, and others have got teenage children, but you're kind of sandwiched between stress.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so so I call it the stress sandwich, which is just exactly what you said. You have the needs of aging parents. Maybe they are requiring more trips to the doctor, or maybe they've slipped and fell, or maybe you're noticing cognitive changes, cognitive decline with them, and you're also just you're contemplating their mortality, right? Like they're in their maybe 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So we see that sort of at the top end. And then on the bottom end is the child rearing piece that you alluded to. So in my case, I have a tween and a teenager and toddlers. I have a girlfriend who she's 43, I believe. She has a 1-year-old now. And so we have child rearing, which in and of itself, it's like I always say, there ain't no hood like motherhood. It's like you
So
just
true.
become a mother, and everything changes. Like now you are not living for yourself anymore. You are completely living for other people because they are a piece of you, and you worry about them. You want to create the best life for them, which often requires you doing a lot of work to become a better parent, a better person for them. So I would say that the time in your 40s is unique, unlike any other, right? So the aging parents, raising children, and then what we were talking about offline, and then you also have like your own sex hormones are starting to change. You're starting to see estrogen decline, progesterone decline, testosterone decline. All these different changes all seem to happen all at once, and so it can be emotionally, physically, spiritually difficult to navigate as well. So those are kind of the top 3 things that I would say are facing women, a modern woman today. And I think has always really faced women in their 40s, but we just have never really talked about it. This is, I really am happy to see that perimenopause and menopause is really starting to have a moment, right, where we are actually speaking about it in podcasts like this, where women are not necessarily suffering in silence anymore, and that there's options for our beautiful women to get the care that they need and deserve.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm really glad we're talking about it. And I think maybe previous generations didn't have quite the same stress because they didn't have the same, we've been very fortunate, right, to have career progression and, better opportunities for women. And so now you're juggling so many things. And it's that, I don't know about you, but what I noticed being in my 40s is just a slight loss in resiliency that I have to work harder at, right? Recovery is really important from exercise.
Yeah.
Alcohol definitely doesn't have a place anymore. There's just,
Yes.
you don't, and sometimes I look at it and I think, am I really seeing this as stressfully as it would be? Or am I magnifying that stress in some way? I have to sort of check myself. And that's what I see with the women I work with as well. It's just this sense of, don't feel as resilient when those hormones, and obviously hormone therapy helps with that.
Sure. Yeah, I completely agree with the resiliency piece. I even myself, I've trained for years and my recovery is different now. So I really have to prioritize recovery from the gym so that I can get back to the gym at the same cadence that I enjoy. If I'm not, engaging in some of these recovery practices, then I'm sore for longer, my energy tanks, all of these different things. So recovery for sure. And then the resiliency, I think part of that is due to we can maybe explore this a little further, but I think that part of it is due to that declining estrogen and testosterone, right? We know these are sort of just, and I even just call them sex hormones, and certainly they are sex hormones. They're involved in secondary sex characteristics, and they're involved in, producing gametes and all of that. And it's important to note that estrogen and testosterone, we have receptors for them all over the body, right? So we have estrogen and testosterone receptors in the heart, in the lungs, in the brain, So when we start to see this estrogen deficient state and testosterone deficient state and progesterone deficient state, you are necessarily and predictably going to see changes in your cognition. You're going to see changes in your mood and affect regulation. A lot of women in their 40s talk about anxiety, right? Like all of a sudden they're anxious and depressed and they can't stop worrying. Back to that sleep piece that I was saying before, like that initiation of sleep, because their mind, like they're wired, right? They're tired, but they're wired. So I think acknowledging the global or maybe systemic changes that we see the impact of these hormones having on the female body in her 40s is also very important as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I was speaking to a journalist here in the UK who's doing a lot of research to put together a documentary at the moment around how women are, with that sort of loss in resiliency and that anxiety, any kind of symptoms that they may have had as a younger woman. So things like if they have bad PMS, for example, we know
Yeah.
trauma has a sort of resurgence, ADHD, any anxiety, if they struggle with postnatal depression, there's this sort of resurgence of symptoms that occur, and sometimes, or they occur for the first time in their 40s, that I think now hopefully is going to gain a little bit more attention, because, there's just so many women that say, I found it impossible to cope during this period. I
Yeah.
thought about taking my own life. And it's these loss of hormones that's often triggering it.
Yeah. Yeah. I read a stat. I'll have to find it and I can send it to you, but I think suicidality or like suicide ideation
Mm.
is at its peak in perimenopause. So we just feel hopeless. We feel like we feel like our bodies are not ours. We feel out of control, and stressful situations that we may have been able to deal with or had the resilience to deal with, when we were 35, let's say, is no longer there when we're 45, and it feels completely overwhelming. And we can talk a little bit about community and social connections, but this is really where female friendships and feeling like you're locked in with people who really care about you, whether that's your partner or you have a bunch of friends who are truly your friends, not just people that you know, but people who you can, meaningfully connect with. I think are also, in some ways, they are a cushion, if you will, to help. It's like we all need girlfriends, like we all need friends who can help reframe things for us, or even just, you know, I think a basic human need, whether you're male or female, is like just to feel seen and heard and understood. Like if I feel like I'm seen by someone, I feel like sometimes I just feel better if I don't even need a solution. I just need someone to listen to me talk about the problem, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so seen, heard, and then like someone understands how, or at least mirrors to me um how difficult it feels in my body at that time. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important, just being seen and heard. And I think also like being around people who are going through something similar, right? That community
Yeah.
element, and just knowing that,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not just me. Do you know what I mean? And I think this is the other thing is, and women often, I don't want to say bear the brunt, because it's so amazing having children, right? And being with them, but we definitely take on our kids' emotions maybe more than their fathers, for example. And I think that when they've also got changing hormones, right? There's just so much going on, because you're
Right.
trying to navigate this new world.
Yeah,
So
females are
yeah.
typically the primary caregivers, and that's not to diminish our beautiful
Mm.
fathers, right? Our, the men in our children's lives help to shape future relationships, future expectations. They help, in my case, I have boys. So, their father, I don't want to say toughens them up, but, kind of shows them the way, in a way that I just want to snuggle them and, and kiss them and cook for them. So I'm not going to show them the ropes. I'm not going to be hanging from a tree, or, doing some activity with them that their dad might. So, yeah, our fathers are incredibly important. And I think that, maybe I'm getting a little off topic, but I think that it's sometimes in the current, we'll say, society, we undervalue men. And I think that that's wrong. I think that there's a place for men and women. And I think our beautiful men do great things in terms of child rearing. The right men do. But for back to the original point, women are the primary caregivers. Like, we're the ones who get up overnight. We're the ones who breastfeed, right? So if you've chosen to breastfeed, or even if you formula fed or whatever, you're usually getting up in the middle of the night, breastfeeding the baby, feeding the baby. A baby has a cold, or a toddler has a nightmare, or someone's sick. Like, you're the one that they go to usually, right? I mean, it's not uniform across all families, of course. I'm painting some broad strokes, but generally the female is a primary caregiver, and we actually see that worldwide. We see that in North American culture. We see that in Europe. We see that in the UK. We see it everywhere, where females typically are the primary caregiver, and they typically in the house, like in the home, have the lion's share of unpaid work. So they're the ones doing the laundry. They're the ones driving the kids to soccer or ballet. They're the ones helping the kids with homework. General cleaning. Like, that's sort of how it is typically split in a heterosexual relationship. And we actually see this also in same-sex relationships as well. So where if you might have, two females or two males, and one of those identifies as more feminine, let's say, that individual, even in a same-sex relationship, typically will bear the brunt of the non-paid work in the home. So yeah, women are, we're the glue, right? We're the glue that keeps the family together because we are doing so much.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And it's interesting what you say there about same-sex relationships. And I think the thing that goes along with all this, right, is that when you're driving them around, when you're picking them up from school, when you're taking them to sports clubs, when you're just doing the laundry, those are the times as well that they come over and just tell you about their day and sort of
Yeah.
offload. So you're taking that emotional side, which is beautiful because you're there with them, but you have to acknowledge, right, how much we're doing
Yeah.
and get that recovery in. What
Yeah.
are some of the practices that you work in? I know that you've recently moved house and you're feeling very clean, as you were saying, like really refreshed, having had this massive clear out, which I did 2 months ago. Had this decluttering person come in and I was like, wow, this just feels so light. It feels incredible. What are some of the
Yeah.
things you're doing?
Well, at the time of this recording, it's like 3 days into the move. So we
Oh my God.
moved. Yeah. So
I'm
we,
so
we
impressed
moved
that you're
3.
actually here today.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah. No, we moved 3 days ago, and I've been preparing for the move. Like, very quick, like 30-second backstory. We bought this beautiful, like what I thought was like my dream home. It was like this beautiful Instagram worthy home, like gorgeous, countertops and the kitchen. And my husband was like, we need a movie theater. Like, we have to have a movie theater because he's a cinephile. So he was like, okay, we'll get a movie theater. We have this front formal sitting room. Okay. So anyway, so we're there for, a couple years, and I'm like, we never, ever watch movies in this damn movie room. Like, we all pile in the family room, like as any family does. We never sit in this formal area. We never, and we're not entertaining as much as we thought we might in this big glamorous, dining room. And so I kind of had this moment where I looked around. I'm like, we are using bedrooms, the kitchen, the family room. Like, that's it. Like, we're using
It's the
like
hub.
40% of the house, maybe 50%, and I started asking myself, like, why do I need this? Like, is this my ego? Like, is it I wanted to show somebody or prove, like, why was anyway? So long story short, Giovanni and I, my husband Giovanni, who you met in
Yeah, I did.
in
Yeah,
London.
met him at the summit.
We decided to sell the home and to downsize, like to get a smaller home. It fits exactly, it still has like great storage, all the things, but it's also constrained me in a way, like I can't bring all the shoes that I wanted, and I don't wear all of the shoes that I have, right? So like some of them I bought years ago, they've just sort of been following me from house to house to house, long out of fashion. And it's like, all right, well, why don't I just donate these to women who can make use of it, right? Same with my baby clothes. Like I have the kids' baby clothes, as you know, you have kids as well. It's like they grow out of it. And like, especially the little baby clothes, I'm like, in the beginning, I was like, oh, I'll save these for when my kids have when I become a grandmother, I'll give them all these clothes. And it's like, but they're going to want their own stuff, like what am I holding on to all this stuff for? So long story short, we've donated, I don't know how many bags now, 12, 13 bags to like a local women's shelter where, the women have like had to leave in the middle of the night. They have children. And so it's like, here's all the dresses that I don't wear, all the shoes. Like you can wear this to a job interview. Like here's all the baby clothes. It's like, have it, have it, have all of it. I was going through my kitchen and I was like, do I really need like wine glasses? Like I don't drink wine, but I have a full set of champagne. I have a full set of wine, like wine for red, wine glasses for, I'm like, I don't need any, I never drink wine. So yeah. So there's been a lot of purging and I feel honestly amazing. I'm so happy right now.
It feels good, doesn't it?
What was
It's
the question?
funny.
I don't know why I went there. What did you ask me about my recovery practices?
I was asking, yeah, just some of the things that you're doing, and I know you saying that you just felt really good doing this sort of clearing out process.
Yeah.
What are some of the other things that you're doing as well, alongside?
Yeah, great. Yeah. So I think, the reason why I was sharing all of those details of my life that nobody's interested in other than me is I think that there's something in perimenopause that's like, what am I tolerating? Like, what am I tolerating that I'm no longer willing to tolerate? So for me, it was like all the shoes and all the clothes and like all the different dinnerware, glassware, barware that like I don't ever use. So I think that that's sort of an emotional question that you might ask yourself in your life. Like, what am I tolerating in my work life, in my love life, in my friendships, with my relationships with my family that are no longer serving me? And what difficult question, difficult conversation, or upheaval, as I have done, needs to happen for me to feel free. So that's one thing. Back to your question about the recovery and the resilience practices. There's a couple things that I do that really help. So and I'll say this with a little caveat, and I'll say that my recovery practices are there to serve. They're like minors. Like it's like I want to major in the majors, right? So the majors are nutrition, fitness, like strength training, sleep, and stress management. So those are kind of the majors, and then the recovery practices feed into that. So sauna use is something that I use very regularly as a recovery practice. I did a solo episode on it not too long ago talking about sauna right after a weight training session and this sort of hypertrophy benefit that you can get because you're activating these heat shock proteins. So our gym has a sauna. Many gyms now sort of have saunas as a feature or benefit of membership. You can also have one in the home. At the Health Optimization Summit, Sunlight and Saunas was there. Shout out to Sunlight, and I also have a sauna.
I do. I love Sunlight, and yeah,
they're so great.
amazing.
Yeah. And so sauna would be one. Although again, if you don't have, let's say if the gym doesn't have if you don't have the footprint in your home for a sauna, or you don't have, like your gym doesn't offer one, like a really hot bath, like an Epsom salt bath is going to mimic that. That's just going to help sort of just relax the muscles, bring a lot of blood to the periphery, help you sweat, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the opposite is true that I like to do as well, which is cold plunges, which less women like. This is what I'm noticing.
I choose the heat every time, I have to say.
Most women, because so many women are like, I'm already cold all the time. My hands are all freezing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's so true. So that's an interesting observation I've noticed about women, because I cold plunge. I'll often alternate between the two. I'll get in the cold plunge and sit in the sauna for like 5, 10, 15 minutes, then do a plunge in the sauna, in the cold plunge. But women really don't like the cold, and I will gently remind you that you don't need to get in the cold as the guys are doing. We don't need it to be that cold. So for women, like for me, I'm in probably in Celsius, it's like 13 to 15 centigrade. For the Americans listening, like 55 to 59 Fahrenheit. So it doesn't need to be like, Joe Rogan and whoever else is like, they're doing it at like, 0 centigrade or, and I don't know what the equivalent would be, maybe 30. Yeah, I think he does it at like 30 or 35 Fahrenheit, something crazy like that. Women don't need to be in as cold temperatures as men do. You just need to elicit a shiver response. You need to get in. It's uncomfortable when you get in. Yes. And then just stay in until you start shivering and then out. Right. So, and I say
And
that
with a
because
sauna, I think it works
yeah,
really well like that. That's how I like it, when you're like cycling between the
when you're
two.
going between the two.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
and going in a cold plunge, I think is easier. I don't know if you found this, than getting in the shower, because in the shower, you're kind of just getting like bits of cold kind of
Yeah.
specking all over you. That's
Just like hitting you
that's
with
the thing.
cold. Yeah.
I went through a real phase of doing them, and I was like, this is so torturous to me just to feel this. So I like
Yeah.
the after effects. Whereas if I get in a cold bath, for example, it just feels incredible. I mean, it takes me about 2 hours to reheat myself,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that's kind of the point, right?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and then like again as a recovery practice. So I did legs this morning prior to our call. Tomorrow morning, I'm getting in the cold plunge, right? Because that's gonna. I often will. I don't pair cold exactly with right after resistance training because there is some blunting effects in the inflammatory process. So we don't want that. We actually want the inflammatory process to happen after a training session. But the next day, when my legs are sore, I'll sit in a cold plunge, start the shivering, all of that. Really, really love it. So those are two big ones in terms of recovery. I'm trying to think of what else I do. I recently invested in the company is called Rapid Reboot. I'll send it over to you. There's a bunch of different companies, but I loved Rapid Reboot. It's basically like legs. It's like sleeves that you put your legs into, and then it's compression. So you get,
Okay.
I do like 120 milligrams of mercury, like in terms of pressure, like 120 mm's of mercury. And then it sort of like just cycles, like it's basically like a massage for your legs. Again, really nice after a leg day. So
Really
there's a
nice.
couple of things that I love to do like that. I would say those are kind of bigger price points, let's say. If we're talking about lower barriers to entry, certainly just like walking, having electrolytes. If you're watching this on video, I'm drinking my element tea. Always getting my electrolytes in. That helps with my recovery, helps with my hormones, helps with like my mood, helps with my cravings, all the things. Yeah, I would say that that's like, getting some early morning sunlight, recovery practice. I love to get up and move around in the morning. So I'm usually like tidying up the kitchen, but I'll go outside and have my cup of coffee outside. Maybe I'll do a lap around the park or something, or like lap around the block. We have a park nearby. So I'll like, go near the park and kind of walk around there. These are all wonderful ways to stimulate blood flow, to get nutrients where you need them. And it also sets you up for better sleep, right? It sets you up for better body composition over the long term. It sets you up for better stress management. So kind of back to what we were talking about, the top 3 things that women struggle with is body recomp, sleep, and stress. And usually it can be solved with a walk. It's like if
Oh
you're
my
feeling
God,
really
yeah.
stressed, go for a lap around the block. If you're feeling super stressed, go for a longer walk. Pop in a
Yeah.
podcast, get Angela's podcast in your ears and like go for like a nice 30-minute walk, 40-minute walk, something like that. So these are recovery practices that help in all the verticals that we've been discussing.
I think walking is just so amazing, right? So, as you were just saying, so many problems get solved on a walk. I want to come on to the nutrition and the fitness, because
Sure.
I know you have a lot to share there. Before we do, just to kind of like segue into that, you are super successful. You have a very busy podcast, amazing podcast, very busy life. You've got 2 children. What are the things, like, what does your daily routine look like? I know you obviously use the sauna a lot, the cold plunge. You also work out really hard. I see you on Instagram doing it. What does your day look like? How do you optimize that and your working life with your family life and all the fitness and everything you do?
Meal prep, meal prep, meal prep. It's like prep, prep, prep. Calendarize everything.
Mm.
I would say, in terms of nutrition, like I meal prep, like, so I will prepare like I'll do sort of a big cook up on, Saturday or Sunday, and then another one on Wednesday. I like to cook for like 2 or 3 days because I can't cook for the whole week. I get bored of the same thing for the whole week. So I'll do sort of two big cookups during the week, and that keeps. I just, put it on the hob and reheat it and it's done. Right. So that's how I kind of keep my nutrition on track. I have noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this, but this is something that I've noticed recently. It feels really luxurious to have a warm meal. And I know how ridiculous that sounds, but I spent years just like eating salads or even leftovers. I would meal prep and then like eat it cold. Like I wouldn't take the time to reheat it. And there's something really lovely about a hot meal. I almost feel like you, it- I bet that there's a study. I haven't looked, but if you take the exact same meal, like eucaloric, so like they have the exact same macros, exact same calories, one's cold, one's hot, you're probably more satisfied after a hot meal. Like I feel more satisfied after a warm meal.
I do.
So it's worth it to just like put it on the stovetop for a couple, whatever it is, and warm it back up again. Um, so that's just like a little aside. So I do a lot of meal prep for the working out. I Right now the way that I work out is a little bit less structured than what it has been in years past. So it used to be like Mondays legs, Tuesdays shoulders, Wednesdays back, whatever, and I would have it that way. I typically now have more of an asynchronous split, meaning that my split kind of extends over 8 days, which doesn't really divide nicely into a week. So, I know that in 1 week, I need to get 2 to 3 leg days and 2 to 3 upper body days, depending on and that allows me for a little bit more feedback, a little bit more auto regulation, because before it was like, if Mondays are legs and I miss legs on Monday, like the next time I have to do it is Thursday, right? So it's like, it was Monday, Thursday, and whatever it was.
Mm.
Now it's like, okay, I am still so. Let's say Monday rolls around, and it's like, okay, I'm still sore from whatever I did on the weekend, so I can either modify the workout, or I can just take today as a recovery day, and then start the legs that I had planned on Monday started on Tuesday, because I have 8 days to kind of get in, 5 to 6 workouts. So
Oh, this is how I
yeah.
do it. What did you call it? Asynchronous training.
Asynchronous, yeah. So
Yeah.
synchronous is like kind of lining it up with the week, like
Mm.
Monday's legs, Tuesday's shoulders, Wednesday's this. For me now, it's a bit more like, how am I feeling? Am I very, very sore? Like I had a really big leg day on Saturday. And so we're recording just, you may be listening to this at any time of the day, but today's Monday. So I had Sunday off and I got into the gym today and I was like, ugh, I'm still kind of sore, like hamstrings are still kind of sore, glutes are still kind of sore. So I'm going to lighten the weight and I'm actually going to change the focus. So, did a quad, like more of a quad heavy day. And then I was still doing some glute and hams, but it was like lighter weights, more volume. So like more sets, more repetitions, sorry. So
That's
just,
something that's really helped me, is basically to split my leg days into one that's kind of glutes and hummies, and then the other one is more quad dominant. And I
yeah,
find I just recover. And then if I've got enough recovery, I might do a third leg
yeah,
workout, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Yeah,
a reason I'm very similar. And the thing you were saying there about upper body, I wanted to pick up on, because I think a lot of women don't train their upper body. And I think actually it requires a little bit more than we think it does if you want to get a definition on the upper body. I think it's easy to
agreed.
neglect or think, oh, the classic thing, right? Isn't it? I don't want to look big. I don't want to do this. But actually, the shoulders, for example, and you were saying you do a shoulder workout, is what gives you that kind of beautiful, it
Mhm.
matches, right? If you're training your glutes, you want to have really nice shoulders as well.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I think it's a shame. It's like a missed opportunity
Mm.
to not train the upper body, because when we're thinking about an hourglass figure, right? So we have, if you think about an hourglass, or some people call it an X figure, so it looks like an X. You have that broadness on the upper half of the body, and then there's a small waist, comes into a smaller waist, and then if there's a flare. So everybody kind of gets the glutes, right? We all want big glutes. But to your point with shoulders for women, absolutely a beautiful way to actually create symmetry. So if you are somebody, my heritage is Portuguese and Lebanese. So we're kind of bottom heavy women. Like we
Are
already
you
like,
also Lebanese? I'm
I
half
am.
Lebanese.
You are. I didn't
Yes.
know that. Oh, that's so
Yeah.
lovely.
How funny.
That is
Yeah.
so funny.
Yeah,
I
my
didn't
father
well,
was Lebanese.
lovely. No, my
Yeah.
mother
But
is
anyway,
from
sorry,
mother. Yeah,
diversion.
yeah. That's awesome. I
Yeah.
love that. So we're kind of
Mm.
bottom heavy, like we're hippie, right? Like we have lots of curves, right? Arabs and Europeans in general, you look at Spain and Portugal and Italy and Greece, like very, France, I would say too, very curvy people. And so I don't like to talk about body shapes as fruits because I find it can be some people can find it a bit derogatory. But if you think about a pear shape, right, it's kind of a little thinner on the top and then rounds out. A lot of women, in sort of that Southern European, Middle Eastern descent will say, yeah, like I'm more bottom heavy than I am on the top, which means that you need to work the top a little bit. And the coronal, so we can get into, I don't know how nerdy you want to go, but like, anything that where we move the arms away from the midline. So shoulder, like lateral delts would be one of them. This is going to create that beautiful sort of cap on the shoulder that is going to complement the glutes. So, if you want big glutes, awesome. I always say like, I want big juicy glutes and I also want glute sized delts. It's like, I want big ass delts. I want big shoulders to
Yeah.
complement, to complement the glutes and the hamstrings and everything that you're trying to develop. So, and I would also say back as well. So don't skip your back. I know you can't see it, and I know that it's hard to connect to because you visually can't see your back. But when we're thinking about developing out the latissimus dorsi, which is kind of like the wings, almost like I call them your angel wings, right? So when we build out the angel wings, again, that's giving that beautiful top half of the hourglass, and also makes your waist look much smaller than it probably is, right? If you have lats that are flared and you have that cap on the shoulder, that is going to visually create the illusion of initially the illusion of a smaller waist, and then eventually it will be that your waist is smaller because you are going to be putting on a lot of lean muscle, and that's going to burn a lot of that sort of visceral adipose tissue that's sitting in the midline, if that's true for you.
Yeah, and I think this works, right, for on many levels for women. Because for me, as someone, and I don't know if it's directly linked to having PCOS, but I have that very straight down physique, right? So you can't see the curves, which is annoying. And so actually, I found as well for women that kind of go straight down and have that more male profile, doing what you're doing and building up the lats and the shoulders has
Mm-hmm.
really helped me to give more shape, right?
Yeah.
To make my waist look like it comes in a bit more, and then I go and to train out my glutes and make my hips sort of come out to give you that more feminine shape. So I think it works for both ways. You mentioned there around like losing some of that tummy fat or belly fat and how weight training can help with that. This is something that women, particularly in perimenopause, struggle with. I found that in combination with just overall movement and a little bit of HIIT just peppered in has
Yeah.
been the way that mine has just stayed, right? I've stayed in shape there. For women who are listening to this and they're like, oh my God, like what is going on? I've got this migration of fat now from my hips to my middle, and it feels like it isn't going to go. What would you say to them? What are the best practices?
Well, I think what you just said is beautiful. So I think that when we think about if we were to talk about my movement philosophy, if there was like a pyramid, the base would be resistance training. On top of that would be like the, you know, low intensity, steady state cardio. So the walking, you could even do zone 1, zone 2, like, walking is probably zone 1-ish. Maybe you can, if you put on like a rucksack or something, you can probably get it up into zone 2. I would say, somewhere between, aiming for a minimum of like 7,000 steps a day, 7 to 8,000. You in the literature demonstrably shows that we see reduction in all-cause mortality, and then specifically like the chronic diseases, the cardiovascular, cerebrovascular, type 2 diabetes, that kind of thing. So 7 to 8 K minimum. Certainly, you can go higher than that if the mood pleases you to do so. But you don't, 7 to 8,000 steps in a day, I think is a great, a great place to aim. And then I love what you said about the HIIT. I think that so many women are doing HIIT training, high intensity interval training, or super maximal intensity training, like 3, 4, 5 times a week. This, in North America, we have, I don't know if it's in the UK, but it's, F45 and like Orange Theory, which are these sort of, and I'm not throwing smack to any particular company, but it's all HIIT. It's all high intensity training. So it's sort of group classes, and it's typically women in perimenopause that they market to. And you typically have these like stations that you'll sort of rotate around, and they'll do that like 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week. That is too much for a
And they're long
perimenopausal woman.
classes, right? They're like 45, 60
They're like
minutes.
45 minutes. It's like, that's not HIIT. Like HIIT training, you should be done in like 20 minutes, like a real high intensity, or like at your maximum, where you're training the top of your, if you're training VO2 max, let's say, the top, like the base is sort of the walking and the zone 2, zone 1 stuff. The top of that aerobic capacity is going to be, your HIIT training. Like you're going to be gassed after 20 minutes, like 30 minutes. Like I can't see how you could do any more than that. Once a week, twice maybe, right? Like once or twice a week. I think even twice a week is probably like a little rich. So I think that in terms of exercise, if you are noticing that you are accumulating sort of that excess, belly fat, let's say, for a lot of women, and PCOS actually, we'll talk about to our beautiful PCOS women, very is a temporary, a transient introduction of a ketogenic diet, where we see a pullback in carbohydrates for, let's say, 8 weeks or 12 weeks. You have to do this under the supervision of a practitioner who knows what they're doing. Often we will see an improvement in insulin sensitivity, which is usually at the root cause of a lot of PCOS issues. It's not that we have, it's not that the patient has too much testosterone. It's that they don't have enough sex hormone binding globulin, or their insulin levels are chronically too high. So a temporary, and I underline and bold and highlight the word temporary, ketogenic diet has been shown, when we clamp back on the carbohydrates, to really help with PCOS, insulin sensitivity, and excess adipose tissue, essentially, located, that visceral fat. Visceral fat is very different in its quality and its behavior than subcutaneous fat. So subcutaneous fat's like the jiggle or whatever that we don't like underneath the skin, at the bum, the thighs, tummy area, whatever. The visceral fat's the stuff that really drives a lot of these chronic diseases, like the cerebrovascular, cardiovascular, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, that kind of thing. So a transient reduction in carbohydrates, transient, temporary, not forever, is very, very important for these women. You can see a pretty nice reduction in visceral fat as well. Let's say it's 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, something like that. And then we can slowly add in the carbohydrates back in, because I do think that carbs are important. They're important for thyroid health. They're important for neurotransmitter synthesis. But you can probably pull back on it for 8 to 12 weeks without any issue.
And with that resistance training, right, afterwards, that's what helps and improve the insulin sensitivity. That worked
100%.
super well for me, because when I was diagnosed with PCOS, it was at the time I was thinking about having a family, right? And if you're not having any periods, you can't really start a family because there's no menstrual cycle. And that was exactly what I did. I went low carb, got my blood work back under control, and then my cycle returned, and I haven't had problems since. It was like very regular after that. But then
3 babies later.
I'm sorry?
And 3 babies later.
And 3 babies. And then, then I had 3 babies in 4 years. So obviously was a good strategy, but albeit a little bit too quick, maybe. It was chaos at the time, but it's all good now. But yeah, and the strength training has just massively helped me. It's really interesting what you say there about F45 and Orange Theory, because I hear it a lot with my US clients and how much they go and how long those classes are. Whereas in the UK, I was at, there's a club here called David Lloyd that has like tennis and all different things. It's more of a broader health club. And they do a very high intensity class, but there is a warning saying you should not book this class more than 2 or 3 times a week, interestingly.
Why is it that people in Europe just get it. I don't know. It's like everything better in Europe. I don't know. I wish that, you know, those fitness facilities, and it's not just those two. I'm kind of picking on there are others where that warning was there. Like, you probably
Mm,
shouldn't be doing this more than twice a week. Yeah.
mm. It should be. And I think the thing I've seen as well is that when women then have that belly fat, right, they think, oh my God, I mustn't be doing enough. I must do more. And that's when
I
it becomes
must
more
do
problematic.
more. I
Yeah.
must do
Keep
more
adding.
of the hit. I must do
Mm,
more caloric restriction. I must hunker down on whatever strategy wasn't working for me before and try to see
exactly.
if I just do it even more, if that will
Yeah.
help. Um and I understand how people get there. Like, I understand the logic. I understand the decision tree where you're like, okay, well, maybe I cheated on my diet, or maybe I didn't really push myself as hard as I could have the last class. So I'll just like go and I'll just go all in. Like, I get how you can come to that decision. Um, but in your 40s and beyond, it's about how can I know the limits? How can I know the finite limits of my matter? And how can I prioritize recovery and reduce stress? Because I promise you, if you are doing any type of high intensity training, whether it's David Lloyd's, you're doing there 4, 5, 6 times a week, that is a stress response. And over time, that will become a chronic stress response. So we want to be very careful about, you know, always having our foot on the gas pedal, let's say, on the accelerator pedal, versus, sometimes sometimes the most productive thing that you can do is rest, which is I think it's a hard message for achievement oriented individuals such as myself, and I suspect you as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's the
Angela.
same. I think
Uh,
it took burnout for me to actually accept it.
but
Yeah.
we're just like I'm
Mm,
going to be successful, and therefore that means I have to go all out, balls to the wall, like foot down on the gas pedal until I burn out. And we've really been taught that. And I think, there's I hope that there's a bit of a reclamation in our 40s. It's like understanding who you are, what you're capable of, and then maybe more importantly, who you are not and what you are not willing to do anymore to yourself, to your body, and to the relationships that you engage in.
mm. Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. I find, and women are also then they're putting that pressure on themselves, and then they're putting everyone else before themselves.
Right.
And I
Right.
think sometimes it's just as simple as saying, I choose me, right? And it's okay
Mhm.
to do that. It's not selfish. I choose me.
Yeah.
Just for a little bit, just 5 minutes a day. But I think you're right. I've seen it so often, that propensity to do more on a strategy, because you think, well, I'm not going hard enough, so I'll go really hard next time.
Yeah.
But the whole reason you're not going hard enough is because you're doing it so often, you can't go any harder. Do you know what I mean? Your body's kind of crying out. I don't know about you, Stephanie, but I found that by following the protocol that you also do, where your workouts are very specific and there's a specific stimulus, like today is leg day, today I'm focusing on my shoulders, my body just responds so well, but so does my mind, because it creates this kind of rhythm and order. Like, I know, and I show up as my best self because I feel like energized post workout, and
Yeah.
there's enough recovery because it's a different part of my body. And then,
Mhm.
like you, I'm the same. If I'm not fully recovered, I'll just, maybe if I'm there, I'll jump on the treadmill, do some zone 2, get the blood flow, go in the sauna, and I just feel so much better. And there's just not this mixed message where I'm like running from one station to the next, then lifting a kettlebell, then going and deadlifting something really heavy, and then doing a sprint, which I think is just tremendous stress actually on a constant basis on the female body.
Yeah, I think technique, this is another thing that if you want to have a long lifting career in the gym, if you want to be a muscle mommy for a long time, a queenager, as I've heard some people say,
I love all
uh,
your terms.
yeah, we want to be thinking about good technique, right? And it's not always about, this is where I rally a little bit against the lift as heavy as you can all the time. I think lifting heavy is important. And you also want to give your joints a little bit of a break, right? Because you are railing on your joints if you do not have good technique and you're always lifting heavy. Like, and when I say heavy, I mean like 5 to 7 reps heavy,
Mm,
So you can like maybe punch out 5 reps. Like, you shouldn't be necessarily doing that all the time. I think that there's a natural rotation that can be built into your fitness routine, your resistance training or your lifting routine, that honors your joints and really honing in on technique. Like, it doesn't actually matter what the weight is on the bar. What matters is that you are moving the weight. The weight is not moving you. If the weight is too heavy, your body's going to find a way to move it, but it's not going to be in the target muscle that you are hoping to, stimulate. So again, when we think about ego and the gym, these are two things that do not go well together. You do have to check the ego at the door. And if you need to go lighter, fine, go lighter, punch out like badass technique. Like, I'm sure you see this, Angela, when you see someone, you go to the gym as I do, and I see so much bad technique. And it's usually like, gotta love them, but it's usually guys. It's usually the bros. They have like 400 plates, on each side, right? It's like if you're in Europe, it's like the 20 kgs. Like they have all the 20s on the bar. In America, it would be like all the 45 pounds. And they're doing like, if it's a squat, it's like there's 10 degrees of knee flexion. It's like, you're not squatting, bro. Like a squat is getting down. It's like, you got to move. You got to get that butt low, So, and when you do see good technique, it's like you can't look away. It's like, wow, look at that stellar technique. And then the weight matters less, because when you have good technique and you are forging that mind muscle connection, the weight is irrelevant. You are maximally stimulating the muscle when you have great technique. So if you're that bro that's listening and if you want to repent, there's time.
There's still time.
There's still time. I would hire a personal trainer. I would even just like strip off, like I'll say, like, in the spirit of like transparency, I hurt myself. So I was doing hip thrusts. It was a couple years ago now, but I was ego lifting. I was like, I want to see how many plates I can get on the thing. I think I had five. I think was it 5 plates or 6? I forget now. I think it was 5 plates I had on the hip thrust bar. And of course, like, again, I had like such small range of motion and I hurt myself. Like I actually strained my iliopsoas. If anyone's ever had an iliopsoas strain, you know that you can't stand up, right? Like you're bowled over.
So painful.
It was so painful. And it's not worth it. Getting injured in your 40s and 50s, you are not going to recover the same way that you did when you were 20 or 30. So it is much more efficient and intelligent to take some weight off and lift properly. The Olympia, I don't know if you were watching the Olympia, it just happened this past weekend, but you see all these guys and girls, like these beautiful men, and like all the different categories, whether it's physique or classic, and then the women, it's like bikini and wellness and figure and everything. You like, when you see them on stage, you're not like, I bet that woman squats like 135. Like you don't see that. Like you don't care what they squat.
That's
what you care
true.
about is how they, in that particular sport, like you care about how they look. And I would garner that many women who are starting to lift weights in the gym. That's how I started. I was like, I want to look good, like you want to have that aesthetic benefit of building muscle. It doesn't matter what you're lifting. And also nobody's watching you. Like nobody is watching how much weight you're lifting. So just do it properly the first time. Don't get injured. And then, keep going from there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me, whenever I kind of feel the ego getting in the way, I focus on the tempo, right? Because as soon as you focus on tempo, and if you're like, right, I've got to squat down for 3 seconds, you have to go deep. And you've got to really focus that mind muscle connection. And then you come up and you can't overload the bar, because you just wouldn't be able to go that slowly and get it back up. And I think that's the thing, because I also had a very similar mistake to you, but it was on the glute bridge machine. And so you return it effectively to the shelf. And so because I felt like, oh, it's on a machine, I can actually push myself even harder. I loaded it so much, I was going to squeeze out the last rep. And then what happened was I didn't quite return it fully to the shelf. So as I tried to move away, it dropped and like smashed on my quad.
No.
Which was so painful.
Yeah.
And then, you learn your lesson, right? You're like, okay.
Yeah. It's like you can either learn the easy way, which is listening to this conversation, or you can learn the hard way, where you have a machine crashing down on your leg, or you can't be upright for 2 weeks, which is, I could not be upright. I couldn't stand upright for longer than I was a couple minutes. And I had so much chiropractic care that those 2 weeks is like almost every day. But yeah, don't make that mistake. Like these are mistakes that are driven by ego, right? And ego and the gym, like they're not friends. They do not mix well.
No, they don't. Do you, when you were talking a little bit about strength there, do you periodize your training across the year? Do you have blocks where you're like, yep, I'm going to go heavy, I'm going to go low rep, and then ones where you're going a bit more in that? I know you get hypertrophy at all ranges, but where you're more in that classic hypertrophy range, do you tend to vary your training?
I actually periodize it to my menstrual cycle. And that's what I talked about in the Betty Body, which is changing the rep range based on sort of the hormonal profile that I'm in that week. So very briefly, if you want, you can pick up a copy of the Betty Body, and I go through this in a lot of detail. But bleed week, or week 1 of your period, if you are someone who's still menstruating, typically a moderate rep range, so somewhere between 8 and 12, depending on my sleep. My auto regulate first, always, right? So it's always checking in with my body. How am I doing? Somewhere between 8 and 12 reps. Week 2, testosterone high, yay. Estrogen high, yay. So I go for strength. So that's like my 5 to 8. Yeah, that's like my 5 to 8 rep range. So it's like that's usually when I'm getting my personal best, like my PBs, my PRs on the weight on the bar. And then the luteal phase after ovulation again returns that moderate rep range 8 to 12. And then prior to the week before I get my period, if I'm feeling kind of achy, inflamed, it's a longer, it's higher volume. So it's like 15 to somewhere between 15 and 25, usually at like 30. I know that the literature is very clear, 5 to 30, anywhere between 5 to 30, there's hypertrophy, but 30 is, I don't know, Angela, 30 is like, might as well be 5 years. Like it is the longest set on the planet. So I could do 15 to 20. I can get up to 25 if I feel like I haven't quite finished, the muscle yet. But 30, I do 30 sometimes, but I just find it long personally.
So
So
you kind
yeah,
of
I
almost
do that.
taking
And
that
then
as a little bit of a deload that week. That's almost
yeah,
like,
it's a bit of, it's kind of a bit of a built-in deload. I didn't actually realize when I first was writing the book, and I was kind of creating this methodology in practice when I was still practicing, I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. But yeah, every 4 weeks, there's kind of a bit of a deload there, which is really nice. I think that, again, when we honor our joints and our tendons and our ligaments, that's really lovely to lighten up the weight and do more reps. So there's a built-in deload about every 4 weeks in the way that I train.
and what do you do with your perimenopausal women if they've lost their cycle, so they no longer have a cycle?
Yeah. It's always, even if you're menstruating or not menstruating, it's like auto regulation. First, you have to check in with yourself. What's your stress levels like? How did you sleep last night? How are you feeling after your sports specific warm up? Not 5 minutes on the treadmill. That's not a sports specific warm up. But if you were going to be deadlifting, let's say, and let's say you have 3 working sets of deads, let's say you're doing RDLs, your warm up should actually be RDLs, right? Just like a much lighter weight. So, and let's say, I'm just going to pull numbers out of, it doesn't matter what the numbers are, but let's say your RDL is 100 pounds. Okay. Maybe your first warm-up set is 50 pounds, right? So you do 50 pounds and you might do more reps than like your working set. And then your second set is going to be like 75 pounds, right? And then your third warm-up set, because you always should be warming up, and you should never just go to your working weight. Maybe your third set's like 90 or 95 pounds. So you're very close to what your working weight might be. And then after you can kind of check in, if you're someone who's not menstruating, after those specific warm-ups, you can say, how am I feeling right now? Like, do I feel like I can do the working weight? Do I need to modify it? Like today I modified, right? I felt like I still kind of sore from my workout on Saturday and needed to modify, and I did. So I think that that's a beautiful way to honor your physiology, honor where you are in that moment, in that day. And yeah, it's irrespective of your menstrual status.
Yeah, I love that. Giving yourself permission there. I think it's so important. So important. So Just to finish, before we finish then, nutrition, because it wouldn't be complete without that. I'm presuming that you are, I know you are, you prioritize your protein. You mentioned briefly a little bit, like for some women who want to reset their insulin sensitivity, then a short period of ketogenic diet can be
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Apart from that, do you advocate like a moderate to high protein with lots of like leafy greens, vegetables, plenty of fiber, and then just the fats and the carbs to me don't seem to be the determining factor on whether someone loses or gains weight. I think women fear carbs, and whenever I eat higher carb, I actually recover better and I'm
Yes.
often leaner. It's actually the fats that I think, because they're so easily stored, right? They're in that form. If you go over your calories, they're much easier. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you on what your approach to nutrition is.
I think, I can speak to it both from what I do, but also what I would recommend to anyone. So the first rule is that you have to eat in a way that you like, not the way that Stephanie eats or the way that Angela eats. Like, you have to eat in a way that serves you, because the likelihood of you sticking to that over the long term is much higher. So there are a plethora of nutritional interventions that are temporary, like the ketogenic diet is one that we talked about in terms of like a hormonal reset if someone is very insulin insensitive. But the one thing I'll emphasize here too is the diet that heals you. Let's say you go low carb, you do keto for a time period, is not the diet that you stick with long term, right? Because you had that therapeutic intervention because there was a problem to solve. But if you stay there, if you stay in keto land, if you stay in low carb land long term, particularly for women, it's been my observation, because I ran and I still have a ketogenic diet. That I'm very proud of. It's, female science, I outlined it all in the Betty Body. But what I found was that women who dropped a lot of weight, they were like, oh, this is like the way that I'm going to eat forever. And then they were always trying to do low carb. And then we would see thyroid, like I was mentioning before, like we'd run into thyroid issues, hair started falling out, no, like mood and affect. And then they would start gaining weight despite, sticking to their macros. So I think sticking with a nutritional intervention, the diet that heals you, is not the diet that you stick with long term. I can't emphasize that enough. So we have a therapeutic intervention, whatever that is. And then we want to just get back to, figuring out maybe a maintenance calorie, that feels good for you, where you're not heavy, you're not hungry, rather, you're not feeling like you're starving, none of that. And then there's going to be a lot of there's going to be a lot of individual preferences, right? Like, I personally like to have a lot of protein, as you mentioned. I oscillate, actually, I oscillate between like liking my protein with my fat, and then like liking my protein with my carbs. Like today, did leg day. Mama needs carbs, like I'm gonna have more carbs today because my legs, like, I need it. I need more carbs, to your point around recovery. Do I love a beef stew that's been kind of simmering on the hob for several hours? Yes, of course, right? And that's like a little bit more fat. Typically, the meat has a little bit more, red meat typically a little bit higher, depending on the cut, a little higher in fat. So like my protein, and I talked about this at Health Optimization Summit, is not a percentage of my calories, it's a gram target. So there's a gram target that I am aiming to eat every day in protein. And then, kind of depending on how I feel, I'll fill whatever's left in terms of calories. I'll fill that in with carbohydrates or fat, depending on my needs and my mood and my desire that day. So today is going to be higher carb. So today is going to be kind of about the same amount of carbs that I have in protein. So my protein target is about 100, and it's a little higher than, because I train so, like, I have a little bit of I like to have a little bit more. So it's like somewhere between 150 and 160 grams of protein. My carbs will be just a little shy of that, like maybe 140, 150 grams. And then whatever the fill is in fat, probably 50. If I'll have to do the math, but like, 50 grams, something like that, 50 to 55 grams of fat. That's kind of what it's going to be like today, but that might be different tomorrow. But the calories are almost always the same. I find the day after legs, I'm usually a little hungrier too. So like maybe my calories go a little up the day after leg day. But generally it's like same protein target, I like carbs to be over 100 grams of carbs, usually around 100 grams to 150 grams, depending on the day. And then, fat is the fill.
I definitely feel better with the carbs. Do you track it every day then? Are you tracking what you're doing?
I don't do it as much as I should. I can eyeball, like I've been doing this for years. So
Same here, I think you can just tell,
I
right?
know what 4 ounces is. Like I know, yeah, I can tell. So, should I? Probably. I
Yeah,
probably should,
I don't.
but
I was just
I can
curious.
eyeball it. I know I've eaten and I also am a creature of habit, right? So I know how much, like I have, egg whites in the morning. Well, usually I'll put one egg, but then I'll like bulk it up with like egg whites, like those carton, like it comes in like it's prepared or whatever. I know about half the carton is what I put in for my, so it's like 6 eggs-ish, 6 eggs, the equivalent of like 6 egg whites. But I'm totally eyeballing it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. But you get to know, don't you? That's the thing. And I
Yeah.
think the other thing is for people who are worrying about it, in reality, your body it's not like a bank account that resets every day. It's kind of more across a week. So if you have a day where you've
Totally.
eaten a bit more, it's not going to
Yeah.
matter. You can like lighten things up a few days later. So it's
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, amazing. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's been super fun chatting to you. I know that you have exciting things both in the pipeline and as we're recording this, just recently launched. Do you want to link? Because I think you've gone premium now as well, right? On the
Oh,
podcast,
thank
which is
you.
exciting.
You're so kind. Thank you. Yes. So we have the podcast, as I mentioned, which is still, the free, it's free. You can, there's a episode every week, but we have launched a premium version of that podcast. So we found when we were surveying our Betties that a lot of people had very specific questions that they wanted to ask. And I wasn't able to put that out into sort of into the Bettyverse, if you will. So we have now put if you are a member of what we call Even Better, so if you're an Even Better podcast member, you can ask me your direct questions. I will record the answer to that. So we call them AMAs, or Ask Me Anythings. So you can ask me absolutely anything. There is no topic off. You can ask me whatever you want, and I'm going to put that in an AMA format that is private, just for our Even Better podcast subscribers. We also have action guides, and we have exclusive bonuses and things that are not available on the public feed. So and it's like, I think we did the math, it's like 33 cents a day. It's not I think right now the price is about 12. It's 12 a month. So if you sort of break, it's like maybe 33, maybe 50 cents a day, something like that. So it's fairly affordable, but it allows us to go deeper, and it allows me to connect more meaningfully with those who want to. And then the other thing that we're launching, so depending on when this episode comes out, I'm in the process of writing my next book, and I am going to be putting a program in that book on nutrition and fitness. And we are going to be starting I'm going to run that program before it's published in the book. We are going to run some cohorts for perimenopausal women to make sure that the program actually delivers on its promise, which is to help with body recomposition, help with sleep, and help with stress management. Those sort of 3 pillars that we've been talking about all day long today. And so that is launching in January 2025. I don't have the exact date right now, but I will send you a link for people if they want to sign up for our waiting list. We'll email you when we have all those details ready.
Amazing. And I'm sure as it gets closer as well, you'll be talking about it on your show as well. So definitely go and check out Stephanie's podcast. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's been really fun.
This has been a delight. Thank you so much for having me.